Yeah, I know. We're trying to protect ourselves. Well, look after ourselves and be better about
Well, the problem with that is we may not be able to get the PowerPoint here, something like that. But you know, ultimately you stand there because you're close to the camera. You see what I mean?
Yeah, well, so then it would be better.
It's a bit of pacing back and forth.
Well, good evening everyone. Welcome to the Effective Living Centre. My name is David McCurdy and I shall be chairing tonight's session in the Seminary of the Third Age. I extend my welcome to those who are joining us by Zoom, those who will be attending a repeat presentation at Blackwood Uniting Church on Sunday evening, and those accessing the podcast of the ELC website. I'd like to begin by reminding you that we are meeting this evening on the traditional country of the Kaurna people. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and in doing so acknowledge their custodianship of the Adelaide Plains for the last 60,000 years. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, their beliefs, and their spiritual connection with this land, all of which are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people today. And we also extend that respect to other First Nations peoples, as together they invite us to join them in seeking to have accepted and implemented the Uluru Statement from the Heart. But before I introduce tonight's speaker, some housekeeping matters. First of all, wearing a mask is no longer compulsory, but if you'd like to keep your mask on this evening, that's fine. Please feel free. If you need to use the toilets, they're on either side of the front entrance. Next thing, how are we going to handle tonight's presentation, the mechanics? Well, halfway through tonight's presentation, or just over halfway, there'll be a short break, allowing you to reflect on what you've already heard, either alone or in conversation with your immediate neighbours. And if you come up during those conversations with questions that you'd like to put to the speaker, at the end of the presentation there'll be an opportunity for you to ask those questions. And if you do have a question, please use the microphone that will be handed to you. And at the end of the session, as always, there will be more opportunity for conversation informally over tea, coffee and nibbles. Which brings us to tonight's speaker. Michael Dowling is currently employed as a minister of the Word at Blackwood Uniting Church. If you have not already done so, I invite you to check out his eloquent biography that was posted on the church's webpage at the time of his induction in March 2019. In it, Michael describes his life as, quote, a strange trajectory, unquote. Born to Irish parents, Michael was raised as a Catholic. However, his childhood faith didn't stick, so that in his early 20s, he was, to use his own words, absent without leave from the Christian faith, and living as a couldn't care less agnostic. During this time, he studied science at the Adelaide University and then worked as an analytical chemist before moving into the field of scientific instrumentation, sales and technical support with companies like Hewlett-Packard. And it was during this stage of his career that our respective life trajectories, his and mine, first intersected when Michael was responsible for installing the first gas chromatograph mass spectrometer in my organic geochemistry lab at the same university. And this turned out to be a milestone in my research career and those of my subsequent postgraduate students. So thank you again for that, Michael. After the breakup of Michael's first marriage, life eventually led him back to the Christian faith and to sharing in a new blended family with his second wife, Joy. When the question of Christian ministry eventually arose, Michael found himself, quite to his surprise, saying yes, having by then developed an almost insatiable curiosity about the intersection between our lived human experience, the workings of the natural world, of which we humans form an integral part, the ever-changing scientific understanding of that world, and our understanding of God. When Joy sadly suffered a debilitating illness, Michael became her carer, beginning in 2009. Upon returning to full-time study and completing his Bachelor of Ministry degree in 2014, he commenced aged care chaplaincy with elder care, which he continued until just before Joy died in 2018. Because of his experience caring for Joy and observing the impact of her long debilitating illness, it is no accident that Michael went on to become an eloquent spokesman for the lobby group Christians Supporting Choice for Voluntary Assisted Dying. It was in this capacity that in March last year he addressed the members of both houses of the South Australian Parliament prior to their debate on the latest voluntary assisted dying bill. Once again, I invite you to check out his address on the web. It perfectly illustrates his qualifications to speak to the theme of our May 2022 series, the relationship between religion and ethics. So his topic tonight is what is the basis for creating a better world? And I invite you to welcome Michael to the lectern.
Thank you very much for that introduction, David, and it's lovely to reconnect in a different way, as we have a number of times since that different life that I lived, and lovely to be here with you all. Ever since David asked me, or gave me this topic last year, the basis of creating a better world. What is the basis of creating a better world? I've had these recurring thoughts of Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Because in it, there's a character, Zaphod Beeblebrox, who is, for reasons that are entirely unclear, elected president of the galaxy. Now, a person so singularly ill-suited to this position, this incredibly important position, you just couldn't imagine. Me doing this talk? David, what are you thinking? I was actually thinking that what I really needed was something else from the Hitchhiker's Guide, this thing called the total perspective vortex, in which a human being could go into this contraption and see your own minuscule perspective in this perspective of all that is. Well, that'd be nice, but alas, I've got my perspective and I have to get on with it. But as I do, I'm confronted immediately with that question, perspective, because there is an understated clause here. What is the basis of creating a better world? According to whom? To give but two examples, the legalisation of same-gender marriage and the legalisation of the choice for voluntary assisted dying. I, like some others, believe that these two changes in legislation were small steps in the direction of creating a better world. Other people would believe wildly differently, that these were actually a direction to creating a worse world. And so that is the first problem that we face. To realise that tonight we might be thinking about how to create a better world based on maybe what major problems the world has at the moment, but this definition of what the major problems is will be different depending on who you talk to. And therefore, how you go about creating a better world will be different depending on who you talk to. And so that's one of the fundamental problems, how to actually get beyond our individual takes on how to create a better world, indeed what the problems are. But there's also a second unstated clause to this question. What is the basis for creating a better world for whom? What about for the top 0.1% most wealthy human beings? Recently, I came across in my research on wealth inequality this table from the United States. It looks at wealth inequality, and I just highlighted in on this thing, top 0.1% of the population have 22% of the wealth. Seems a lot, but what does it mean in real terms? What it means is that the top 0.1% of the United States wealth holders hold as much as the bottom 90%. I thought that table would make an interesting graph. Why don't you graph it, Michael? So I did. And I graphed the national wealth on the vertical axis, the percentage of population on the horizontal, and what we have here is this virtually vertical line to start with. This is where the uber rich live, with that tiny, minuscule percentage of population garnering virtually all the wealth, and then the rest is distributed with everyone else. So according to the top 0.1% of the most wealthy in the world, basis of creating a better world, the world is perfect just as it is. What about the perspective of the bottom 0.1% wealth holders? Well, let's go broader again. Let's go broader still to the perspective of the biosphere. What is the basis of creating a better world for not just us humans, but the whole biosphere? Given what we humans have contributed to in the loss of species, the degradation of our natural environment, anthropogenic climate change, the most poignant commentary I have heard, the perspective of the biosphere, is from the movie The Matrix. If you don't know the plot, the gentleman on the right is interrogating the fella on the left, but he's actually not a human, despite appearances. He's a computer program. And in this interrogation, he shares, I'd like to share a revelation with you that I've had since my time here. It came when I was trying to classify your species, you humans. And I realised that you humans are not actually mammals. You see, every mammal comes to a natural equilibrium with its surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move into an area and you multiply until you've consumed every resource, and the only way you can survive is to move to another area. There is another organism that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. You human beings are a disease. So, according to the perspective of the biosphere, when it comes to the basis of creating a better world, I think the answer is very clear. All depends whether we're going to do it the slow way or the fast way. The slow way is keep doing what we've been doing. And within a few hundred years, whatever, this world will be uninhabitable by humans. We'll go extinct as a species. We'll take lots of other species with us, but the biosphere will recover. But maybe there's a more decent way of doing it. Maybe we should do the decent thing and go the fast way. And tonight, as the 7 billion of us here, agree to commit suicide tonight, because the biosphere will thank us in the morning. But then I thought, maybe there's species suicide lark. Maybe it's a bit of a soft option for people apparently made in the image of God. And I started thinking, made in the image of God, made in the image of a creator God. God has created creation. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes on what might seem like a real diversion for tonight. I ask you to hang in there with me, please, even when it seems that I have kind of really gone off track, because I tell you, it will have fundamental reality and fundamental linkage to the topic. Because how we view the way God creates, how we view the nature of creation, how we view the nature of humanity, will fundamentally play into how we view the human capacity to create a better world. First of all, why should we have to create a better world? Why didn't God create a better world to start with? This brings us to that wonderful theological conundrum called the theodicy problem. The theodicy problem is this: the monotheistic faiths of which Christianity is one believe in an all-powerful and all-loving God. But apparently this all-powerful, all-loving God has created a world that is, most people would agree, imperfect. It is the ultimate, please explain. And so Christians have taken a very elaborate way of explaining and understanding the theodicy question. But there is actually a really straightforward way of explaining the theodicy conundrum. If we are biblical literalists, and I strongly suspect most of the people coming to the Effective Living Centre are not biblical literalists, but if we were, then it's actually really simple, because we can bring into question one of the starting premises. All of these are assumptions that God is all-powerful and all-loving and that the world is imperfect. What if we bring into question that God is all-loving? Let's look at the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, there is documented evidence that God is loving, and then at other times, hateful, violent, murderous, genocidal. And so if we humans then look at each other and look at ourselves and say, we at times are loving, but other times hateful and violent and murderous and genocidal, we are merely a reflection of our Creator God. We are truly, if we are biblical literalists, made in the image of God. We are a chip off the old block. But for some reason, even though I think that solved the theodicy problem, biblical literalists don't like that solution. What they like is they like to avert their gaze from the texts of divine violence in the Bible, or if confronted with those texts, they will engage in a process that might be referred to as violence laundering, whereby God is washed clean. It is in effect, to use the Richard Nixon defence, the President does it and it's not illegal. If God does it, then it's not hateful, violent, murderous, genocidal. And if we have that particular view as we look at the Bible, we can see that this process of washing God clean of any culpability for violence actually establishes a very useful precedent for us human beings. Because Christians who followed on over the centuries, when they have wanted to justify their own violence, and think here of the Inquisition, religious wars, religious bigotry, the Crusades, just as God can engage in hatred, violence, murder, genocide, and be righteous, so too can we. And so this still leaves them, however, leaves traditional Christianity with a problem. The theodicy problem is there. God, all-powerful, all-loving. Yes, God is all-loving, as we look with an almost straight face at the Bible and say that that is the God depicted in here. And we say, how can we actually solve the theodicy problem? Well, Christianity has a particular context in which the theodicy problem is engaged. It is engaged in the context of what to do with a crucified Messiah. I want you to imagine this. You had been transported tonight back 2,000 years to the gates of Jerusalem as Jesus enters the city of Jerusalem on that Sunday we immortalise now as Palm Sunday. The crowd is cheering and you are thinking something. You're thinking what everyone else in the crowd is thinking. You're thinking this: thank goodness the Messiah is here. I can't wait for him to be crucified to save me from my sins. There were many expectations around Jesus as Messiah. None of them involved him being nailed to a cross. The fact that he was nailed to a cross called for some very fancy footwork and creativity. First on the part of the New Testament writers, as they mined the Old Testament for passages to do with suffering and sacrifice and appropriated them to Jesus. And if we look at these passages, probably a couple of hundred of them, if we look at them by any objective standard, they are cherry-picked, out of context, have nothing whatsoever to do with Jesus and his death on the cross. But even still, they are left only with images of sacrifice. They required this particular theologian, Augustine of Hippo, in the 4th and 5th centuries, as he developed a systematic theology, the original sin and the doctrine of the fall. But you might say that, well, surely Augustine just read Genesis literally, didn't he? He read the story of Adam and Eve eating the literal forbidden fruit, and we as their descendants have fallen. We're tainted with original sin, having fallen from original righteousness. Therefore, Jesus had to die as a human sacrifice to save us from our sins. Of course, a literal reading of Genesis tells us that. Only thing is, it doesn't. As we can get prima facie evidence for looking at the Jewish faith, which has no belief in the fall or original sin, because it's not there. Augustine has to import assumptions into the Genesis text. My favourite of which is the assumption of original righteousness. Original righteousness is where Augustine makes a clear distinction between Adam before he takes the fruit and Adam after. Before he takes the fruit, he has this thing, original righteousness. After the fruit, he is corrupt, he has fallen because he has been tainted with original sin. If you like, if you're fans of Lord of the Rings, the pre-fall Adam is Gandalf. Gandalf the White, perfect, able to choose the good, almost superhuman in his capacities. After the taking of the fruit, he is Grima Wormtongue, disgusting, depraved, corrupt, unable to choose the good. Do we see this in the text? Not remotely. Adam, before he took the fruit, bit of a passive, useless prat. After he took the fruit, still a passive, useless prat. Exactly the same. Next assumption, that Adam and Eve are the ancestors of all that are. That is, we're all descended from Adam and Eve. They're the universal ancestors. But Genesis doesn't actually imply that. If we look at Genesis 4, Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, after he's killed his brother Abel, is confronted by God with his sin and cursed, and Abel is bewailing his fate, going, "That's terrible. I'll have to roam through the earth and anyone who sees me will kill me." Who's going to kill him? There's just mum and dad. And then he marries a woman. Where from? And then he goes to the land of Nod and he's building a city. But it's just him and his wife and the kid. Surely a tent would have sufficed. What was he building a city for? Because there are other people there at the time. It's obvious. And so, if anyone ever says to you that you are fallen, say, "Oh no, mate, I'm not fallen. You got me mixed up with someone else. I'm not descended from Adam and Eve. I'm descended from John Smith from the land of Nod." The next assumption. Why is that not moving? Have I turned it off? Oh damn, I have in my... Oh no. Nope.
can do it for you.
Okay, that'll be good. It'll be tedious, but thank you, Fergus. I appreciate that. So, Adam and Eve, next one. So, he's imported the assumption, has Augustine, of natural disasters. That is, before the fall, and if it comes back alive, just let me know and I'll grab it again. Imports the assumption of natural disasters. Before the fall, it wasn't just human nature that was corrupted, it was the entire cosmos that was corrupted. Therefore, no natural disasters before the fall. Natural disasters, presumably like asteroids hitting the Earth. Fergus? Next one. Such as the asteroid that is believed to have destroyed the dinosaurs 65 million years before humans walked the Earth. 65 million years. We can see the dinosaurs saying, oh damn, here comes that asteroid. If only Adam 65 years from now had not taken the fruit, God wouldn't have been having to retrospectively throw a rock at the Earth 65 million years earlier. Next one, please. Next. I think it's fair to say that there are a few shortcomings with full salvation theology. The first is that it is morally repugnant. The idea of Jesus being offered as a perfect human sacrifice to God. It is also intellectually indefensible, logically incoherent, and represents a willful misuse of the biblical texts. If you like Fergus, can we have the next one, please? If we consider the acronym FALL, I think a fairly useful way of understanding FALL is to consider that it is an acronym. Fairy tale assumptions leavened with literalism. And if we consider this fairy tale nature of the fall, you might say, well, what's wrong with fairy tales? What's wrong with believing in a fairy tale? If I really want to believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden, what's wrong with that? Surely that's okay. The only thing is that some versions of believing in fairies at the bottom of the garden, such as false salvation theology, have real-world implications. One of which I saw one night heading into the city. Once a month I go into an event at the Rob Roy Hotel called Science in the Pub. And as I was going down Goodwood Road, I saw emblazoned in neon signs, "Good news for today, Jesus Christ will solve climate change." I was transfixed. I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get Science in the Pub and talk with my science mates and share this news. We could immediately send off an email to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change saying they could disband the organisation. We could cease all efforts to ameliorate climate change. All we needed to do was sit, believe in Jesus, wait passively for Jesus to come and solve everything. The ultimate in Christian passivity and disengagement from the world. If we consider the problems of our world, if we consider the many, many real problems in our world, some of the people that believe in false salvation theology, by some estimates, there are of the order of 600 million evangelical Christians in the world, perhaps a few 100 million of whom believe that the major problem in the world is not climate change, is not shocking wealth and other inequality. It is not political corruption. The major problem in the world is that human beings are fallen because Adam took a literal fruit in a literal garden, tempted by a literal serpent. And therefore we are fallen, corrupt, and can do nothing good in our own right. So how could we possibly create a better world? This has real-world implications because the fundamental point here is that the basis of creating a better world is first believing that it is actually possible to create a better world. And if your theology predisposes you to believe that it is impossible because you are fallen, corrupt, and can do no good, your life efforts will not be pursued in the direction of that. They will instead be pursued in the direction of convincing people of your own theology so that you can save souls for Jesus. You're not able to move the slides forward, Fergus, even with a computer?
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, it's working again, isn't it?
Yeah, all yours.
Okay, good. Because there's a couple of slides here that may be hard to describe without. I believe one of the things that is absolutely critical to that basis of creating a better world is that, number one, we believe that it is actually possible, but also to have a view of creation and a view of human nature that is actually grounded in reality rather than being grounded in a fairy tale. Instead of seeing a cosmos that is fallen, to see a cosmos that is utterly inspiring, or inspiring from quark to quasar. To see a cosmos that is not static, not a static creation where God has created Adam and Eve and moon and stars as a fixed creation that is then just simply what it is, but rather an unfolding, dynamic, continuous creation. Augustine, I think, had great promise as a philosopher, and I think if he pursued that path, he might have spared the world some of his theology. But he said at one point, God created the world and time, not in time. And this was a prescient understanding of the modern cosmological understanding that at the Big Bang, time itself was created. So if God exists at all, God exists outside of time. So what we consider as past, present and future, God sees as an eternal now. So it's not right to say that God created the world, the universe, 13.7 billion years ago. God is creating the universe in every temporal moment and is inviting all of creation, including human beings in a special way, to participate in that creation. And human beings, seeing them not as fallen, but fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm sure that you have your own ways of instilling awe and wonder, but pick up an immunology textbook sometime and just flip through it to see the mind-numbing complexity of the human immune system, the absolute genius of complexity that keeps you alive every single day of your life, the absolute wonder of our body. And what of human beings in general? Robert Sapolsky, one of my favourite scientists, neuroscientist and primatologist, wrote this magnum opus called Behave, the Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. In it, he takes a very different take on what it is and why we do things, not because we've fallen, by the way. He has something like this concentric series of time circles where we say, what is it that moves someone when they reach out a hand either in love or to pull the trigger of a gun to kill? In the second before, the neural impulse. In the seconds to minute before, the sensory stimuli. In the hours to days before, the hormonal and other biochemical messengers in your bloodstream. In the days to months before, the neuroplasticity of which we're capable. The adolescence, the huge change in the human brain, prenatal and infancy stages, and then our cultural evolution and genetic evolution over millions of years. All of these contributing. So many factors, so many timescales contributing to what we do in the moment, whether we reach out a hand in love or in hate. What are we really like, us human beings? Very few of us are Gandalfs. Very few of us are Grima Wormtongues. Most of us are a bit like that. Well, if you're lucky, you don't look quite like that. But maybe you're a little bit like that. Because sometimes I have some good ideas, but a lot of the time I'm pretty clueless. Sometimes I do good things and sometimes I do bad. I can act with compassion, I can act with great selfishness. I've done things in my life I'm proud of. I've done things in my life that I'm ashamed of. I am a mixed bag, and I suspect you are too. But in terms of this particular mixed bag, you asked me along for the basis of creating a better world, so I guess I better give it to you. So here's my manifesto for a better world. I've only given you 3 points here, the full thing. I don't want to hit you with too much wisdom at once. But the first one, change social media algorithms and web browser algorithms so that rather than affirming and further polarising pre-existing beliefs, people are instead challenged to expand and broaden and nuance their beliefs. Incorporate daily meditation into reception to 12. Include civics and ecology units from reception to 12 to inculcate a sense of civic and ecological responsibility in our young. And most importantly, ban the sports bet organisation and imprison its creators of its commercials. That is my manifesto. I am extremely confident that that will actually do the job. But sadly, I tend to listen to a lot of lectures, and I've got a lecture echoing in my head at the moment from this chap, Daniel N. Robinson. He warns us about getting confident. Tonight we're trying to work out the basis of creating a better world, and I've got my manifesto, which you can see in detail. You're probably very confident about your basis of creating a better world as well. Daniel Robinson says this: when your confidence has reached a very high regard, particularly everything that can be learned experimentally, and by reason, by direct observation, by analyticity, by linguistic analysis, by consultation with cultural historians and anthropologists, so you're absolutely certain you've got the thing nailed down, then what I would urge as a therapy is to stand in front of a mirror and say, I may be wrong. I may be gravely wrong. I may be hopelessly and irretrievably wrong. And in that, you may very well be right. We're going to break for a moment, and we're going to consider how we can possibly move from multiplicity to unity, where you've got billions of different versions of what a better world is, billions of different versions of what the big problems are, billions of different lenses through which the world is looked. Some are fantasy lenses, whether they're the lenses of religion or the lenses of QAnon conspiracy theories. Everyone has their own lens. I would like you to just take 10 minutes, turn to the person next to you or in your little group or by yourself, and just for 10 minutes think how we can move from multiplicity of views to something resembling unity.
Carroll, and it talks about the human condition, and the human condition doesn't matter to the not the human condition is one of moving from innocence to experience of disintegration to reintegration, and that's the whole thing. The second thing that he mentioned Augustine was touching on the issue of human soul. So it's irrelevant to what human testimony stories, because every culture, every age has limitations, and it builds with and has faults in its own moral development. We need to develop into the Christ Jesus view of the human being with non-negative positive potential, and build with that and not that's my
Well, I've been talking about the unity
We're the next generation.
Well, I had some great experience. Well, it is. So much. That's something very much there. Not taking it serious. Stay so and it's mockery traditions and beauties. It doesn't take into account that there's an evolution dynamic and cultures and traditions away. I think in the evolution of time, we come to see the world soul, atoms, forces, I think that's the next step we need to go to. But that's a reaction. Pure understanding of where how it works. Very, very celebrating step towards the
Fergus, are you ready to?
Can we come back to the main group again, please?
Sorry.
I think we are in the need for a little bit of cheering up. We need to get some help on this creating a better world business. Sadly, the first area that we go to for help, might we evolve out of it? It's a bit too slow, us human beings. We've been around 200,000 years and the geneticists and others tell us we haven't changed very much, so kind of rule that out. But there is a lot of hope for cultural evolution. I'm going to share with you a couple of things that have given me hope for a better world. One of them is a book by the psychologist Steven Pinker entitled The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. That might shock some people. No, surely it's getting worse. No, Steven Pinker in these 800 pages argues persuasively that as hideous as we modern humans can be to each other, we used to be much, much worse. For example, we no longer torture cats in the public streets of Paris by burning them alive for public entertainment. We no longer torture human beings in England for public entertainment. You might say, well, no, World War II, that was the worst ever. Not at all. It was number 9 on the list, total top 100 list of world carnages. For example, the Mongols in the 13th century killed, it is an estimated 40 million people in the 13th century. If that is scaled up to today's population, it would be equivalent to killing 280 million. That was with swords and axes. Imagine what the Mongols would have done with nuclear weapons. So there is some cautious room for optimism. Another area of optimism, Barack Obama. How did we go from Barack Obama to Donald Trump? I really don't understand it. But one of his day jobs since being president was to create a series for Netflix called Our Great National Parks. And in one of the episodes he talks about Chilean Patagonia, this huge area on this enormously long country where they have rewilded these enormous swathes of land, and they've actually created a contiguous corridor for migration of wildlife and rewilding. It is truly inspiring. I was inspired by this at my church, Blackwood, that I'm privileged to be the minister at. The Australian Parents for Climate Action had a Meet the Candidates event for the seat of Boothby focused on one topic, climate change. And as much as we said, look, we'll do anything we can to support you, I'm thinking privately, no, these politicians, they won't buy into it, they won't rock up, and people probably won't come. We had the politicians rock up, the four main candidates. We had 200 plus people come to this one existential crisis event. One topic. Cultural change is real. It does happen. It is happening. And sometimes it can happen really rapidly. One of my heroes, Robert Sapolsky again, a primatologist and neuroscientist, works and has done for the last 25 years, spends a few months a year with a baboon troop in East Africa. And he does it because they provide a wonderful model of the human stress response. They are a very, very sociable species. They hang out. They like us. They like to hang out together. But like us human beings, they can also at times be absolutely hideous to each other. They're a good model. And Robert Sapolsky relates this quite amazing happening where this freak event occurred. There was a tourist park near this baboon troop, and tourist parks produce garbage. And they had a garbage dump outside the park, and the baboons thought this was Christmas. They just went there, they didn't have to fossick for food anymore, they just went to the garbage dump and they got all this free meat. It was absolutely brilliant. And the baboons that dominated the garbage dump and would let no one else there were the alpha males, the most aggressive baboons. The only thing was, there was tubercular meat, and they all died. So all the aggressive alpha males died out almost overnight. And overnight, the culture of that troop was transformed into one of affiliation. When male baboons transferred in from other troops, which is the way with baboons, if they were all aggressive and aggro, they got told in no uncertain terms, that ain't how you behave around here. And you could actually see male baboons grooming each other. Unheard of. A total cultural transformation. Now, I think it's unlikely that we'll be able to get Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and the other alpha males invited to a tubercular barbecue fest, but cultural change can happen rapidly, and it can actually transform the way we do things. What about a pathway to a better world, the human capacity to enter a different level of reality? Do you remember Jesus saying the kingdom of heaven is like? Kingdom of heaven is like a pearl, it's like a merchant in search of fine pearls, it's like a net cast into the sea, it's like a mustard seed. Nowhere does Jesus say what it is. That's really intriguing. Us as ministers in the Uniting Church, we're sent to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of heaven without Jesus ever saying what it is. It is a little bit like the movie The Matrix. No one can tell you what the Matrix is. You must see it for yourself. No one can tell you what the kingdom of heaven is. You must experience it for yourself. And in my limited experience of the kingdom of heaven, those moments when I have connected to something deep and magnificent. It might be in a moment of meditation, it might be in a moment walking through the Sturt Gorge or the Burundi Wildlife Sanctuary or somewhere else or with another human being. I have felt transported out of myself. I feel this deep connection with everyone and everything. I feel this sense of self-forgetfulness and wonder as I am lifted out of myself into this space. And there, it's actually really easy to love other people like yourself because you've basically forgotten about yourself and you're loving and connecting others so deeply. But then the feeling goes, and then it comes again and it goes. But there may actually be a doorway to the kingdom of heaven. This wonderful Indian scholar, Eknath Eswaran, wrote a commentary on the Beatitudes entitled Original Goodness. And in it, he explores the Beatitudes, the first of which is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's a way of getting into the kingdom of heaven. Who wants to be poor in spirit? I want to be rich in spirit and highly spirited. But what he translates this as is, "Blessed are the poor in self-will." Blessed are those who have actually surrendered their will, who don't dominate others with their will, who aren't defending their point of view and wanting to convince people of their position and dominate others, but have actually surrendered it. Do these ring a bell? Thy will, not mine, be done. And if you cling to your life, the word for life, the Greek word is psyche. We could translate it as ego. If you cling to your ego, you lose it. Give it up for me and the sake of the gospel. You will find it. I have been crucified with Christ. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. This losing of self, this stepping into a greater reality. He gives as one of his absolute heroes in this becoming impoverished in self-will, Mahatma Gandhi. A man who so surrendered his will, so connected with something deep and rich and wonderful, he was able to inspire a nation through non-violent, non-cooperation with an oppressive and violent regime and brought the British Empire to its knees through impoverished self-will. Contrast that with Vladimir Putin, rich in self-will, who has brought the nation of Ukraine to its knees through violence and his self-will. What a contrast. Another one of my heroes, another thing that inspires me about the potential of human change and a better world is Matthew Ricard. This extraordinary person did a PhD in molecular biology. He was destined for this scientific superstardom. Surprised everyone. Said, "I'm going to Nepal. I'm going to become a Buddhist monk." Which he became and has been for the last 50 years. He's the Dalai Lama's French translator. He has, in that space, been this model of the contemplative and the active life, having created 100 non-government organisations ministering to the poor in Nepal and India. An extraordinary person. And for the relevance of this story, for 20 years he has worked with neuroscientists, mapping states of the human brain in different states of contemplation. And some of these papers by people like Daniel Goldman and Tanya Singer in the Max Planck Institute are extraordinary. Just one of those findings that we have two ways of responding to tragedy in the world, tragedy in another human being. When we watch the SBS News, we can respond in two different neural ways that can be modelled on EEG and MRI. One might be described as empathy. Empathy where we feel what another feels, but what that is subject to is empathic distress and ultimately empathic burnout. You've heard of burnout of people who are trying to do this sort of work. But another neural signature is one that is correlated not with the negative emotions like fear and distress and hopelessness, but positivity and love and hope and generosity. And that is what he calls compassion, where we flow out, not in, with our compassion for others. And it is actually possible to train people in compassion through compassion-based meditation training. Extraordinary potentials of the human person to change. Viktor Frankl, another example. that we can indeed not just simply be automatically following the pathway if we've been abused in our childhood or we've had a terrible upbringing. The wonderful Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and in that horror on earth discovered what he termed the last of the human freedoms. Everything he said can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the power to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. If he can do that on that hell on earth, if he can see people give away their last piece of bread to a stranger in greater need, what potential is there for the human species? Some of these pathways to individual transcendence where we connect with that interconnected realm of the kingdom of God. Religious people have been doing it forever. We have things such as meditation, prayer, the experience of awe, the practice of gratitude, focusing on the needs of others, focusing on changing yourself, not others, contributing to a worthy cause and seeing yourself as part of something greater than yourself. All of these contributing to lifting us out of ourselves. I wonder, what about the long term? We've been speaking about what us human beings might possibly be able to do to create a better world, but I wonder what's God up to in the long term? What's the big picture? It has been an extremely long journey to where we are. Some 13.7 billion years. An incredible series of emergences. Initially from energy to mere matter. The emergence out of matter of life. The emergence out of mere life to conscious life. This phase here that we're in, this phase of conscious life, I wonder where we get these little glimpses, these mere glimpses of the kingdom of God, where we feel deeply, deeply connected with another human being in a moment of compassion, or deeply connected to the world in a moment of awe, looking at a sunrise or going through a forest, or maybe in a tragedy like a bushfire when a community comes together because all the rubbish has been put to one side and they come together and lose that individual will and come together as one. But I wonder, what's God up to in the longer term? Might there be something beyond mere human consciousness? Something that we cannot even conceive of. We have been given a glimpse of the kingdom in those wonderful moments that many of us have experienced. But what might be the totality of what God is saying? In Genesis, God said, after he had created in these 6 mythological days of creation, which science understands as this process of ongoing evolution, ongoing cosmogenesis, over 13.7 billion years. When God at the end of those 6 days saw it, he said, behold, it was very good. We look at our world and it's not very good in the moment. But what about looking at it as the totality? This whole space-time bubble that is the universe. Did God say that was very good and essentially it was worth doing? And that this universe is not finished. It is still in the process of creating, and we are co-creators with God in it. But meanwhile, it's back to us merely conscious human beings trying to create a better world. And I thought I'd leave with something that ties into something that steps beyond our individuality, how we all have individual ways of looking at what a better world would be and what the problems are and how we have to go about facing them, but we can all at times connect to something deeper. These words are from the song Within by Helen Wiltshire from Pilgrim Church, who has put to words so many beautiful, beautiful songs. She says this: within each heart and soul and mind are dreams for earth and humankind, new ways to live with paths untrod, sacred space, infused by God. May your dreams for earth and humankind, may the paths you take together to create a better world, may those paths be paths through that space infused by God. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. As we indicated at the outset, we'll now have a short period when people can ask questions or make a comment. Please grab the microphone if you'd like to do so.
Thank you very much, Michael. Not directly on your theme, but you came to it late with that pyramid of matter to so forth to consciousness. I can't articulate this, I don't have enough understanding, but in my lay reading of certain schools of quantum physics and beyond, there's a lot of suggestion that in fact we start with consciousness in the cosmos or the universe and move the other way. Somehow or other, say right down to matter is sort of a field, a matrix almost in this, that matter is actually held in consciousness, and in a sense everything, and I was saying this in the group, I was getting a bit animated, but to me everything is infused with life and consciousness, but we have to be awake to it. And I don't mean that just in a poetic way, but in an indigenous way. The trees and the mountains and that have something, not of our consciousness, but a consciousness and life of their type. So I don't know if you want to comment, but thank you anyway.
It's an absolutely wonderful question, and I've actually had conversations with a good friend on that same thing. Does matter come first or does consciousness come first? I'll just share with you one little thing first, which I think it was just mind-blowing when I heard it, and it kind of almost puts the two together. This wonderful physicist, Carroll, on a series of lectures on the Higgs boson I listened to, he said at one point, and this is one of the world-class particle physicists, he said, particles of which we are comprised, as according to particle physics, we're comprised of quarks and protons and leptons and etc., etc. Don't have to worry about the details, but we're made of particles. He said, particles are a convenient fiction. The fundamental reality is the underlying quantum fields which instantiate them. It is the vibration of those quantum fields that instantiates the particles. That's what we are. We're just a series of vibrations in these invisible quantum fields, and we're kind of this agreement for a period of time to form this body of matter. Now, if that quantum field thing isn't a synonym for consciousness, I don't know what, but I really love the question, and I'm with you when it comes to things like trees and the like. If we think about what happened with science's understanding of how we got here, and science's understanding is always provisional, that 13.7 billion years ago, particles eventually, it's me. And this idea that, hang on, I am, in a sense, the universe having become aware of itself. So what is potential in every particle in the universe is the potentiality of consciousness, whether we call it a proto-consciousness or whatever. And then you go, well, what's beyond the universe? Well, okay, that's God, and is God consciousness? Now you're getting into, I don't know. Brilliant question. I really wish I could have a better answer.
Thank you for your great answer. Wonderful.
Just a little comment of something that has actually blown my mind in the last 6 months, is the knowledge or the realisation that trees communicate to each other. I've only found that out 6 months ago, and I'm still trying to process it. It just blows my mind.
And I think that I'm with you, Penny. The more I learn about the natural world, the more my mind is blown. These so-called mycorrhizal networks, these fungal networks under the earth that actually communicate between trees, pass nutrients, almost like a neural network where trees will communicate and cooperate. Our microbiome, we have 100 times more bacteria in us than constitute our body cells, and without them we would be extremely sick or not here at all. That they actually influence our immune system, they influence actually our thoughts, our neurochemistry. If it's not complicated enough with these 100 trillion human cells, we add all these bacteria in, we're a multi-organism. It's truly, and so I guess part of me, my emotional response to the notion of creation being fallen is, I look at creation, I look at human beings and I go, I'm just overawed with wonder. I don't see fallenness, I see absolute tragedy, I see awful things occurring, but I see absolute wonder as well. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Michael. I think we might bring to an end the formal proceedings. Please join me in thanking Michael for an exceptional presentation. I can't think of a session of the Seminary of the Third Age that we've had in the past 4 years or so that is anything like this. So, in your own way, you're quite unique, mate. Thank you. I've got the bacteria in my body craving for a cup of coffee, so I'll just mention that next week our speaker is going to be Martin Sampson, who will be speaking on Jesus, the basis for a prototype of applied ethics. So I invite you to consider coming along next Thursday. Thank you for coming, and please enjoy your conversation over coffee.